Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the summit first and foremost. My name is Stacy, and I'm, as you know, Robin mentioned, I'm a senior solutions engineer here at SAMS. I do, however, have a degree in fine arts, and I've been working in InfoSec for, gosh, what has it been, 6 years now, across different analyst and engineering positions. My lightning talk is preserving creativity and the ethical implications of AI art generators. Finally, a talk that is meant for as fast as I can talk. And if you don't know me, I am a huge nerd. And if you can't tell by my background, I am also a painter. Yes, that is a big old splotch of paint you see there on my wall behind me. So with that, I do feel like I'm in somewhat of a unique position whenever it comes to talking about this topic. And I just feel very compelled to talk about it as well. So just to start out, I talked a little bit about who I am. I also have a very creative presentation that I am really excited to show all of you. So strap yourselves in because I am ready to go on. And, let's start from the top. Well, what is AI art? We've heard a lot about AI today, but AI art is essentially any image that's created through the use of an AI art generator, which can be a combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, that's often paired with the use of deep neural networks. Typically, these are text to image or image to image models and generators in which the aforementioned method utilizes existing artwork, photography, and other imagery to automate an output. So that's all nice and good, but what does that all mean, right? How does that work? Well, for image generation, AI-powered models like DALL-E, Midjourney, Lensa, and Stable Diffusion have to be trained through data sets composed of just millions and millions of images. These data sets are annotated so the machine has a text reference, and the device is tweaked and calibrated and just, it's updated until it can recognize those photos. Stable diffusion is a commonly used methodology for AI art generation, and I'll take just a brief moment to touch on this and note that some of these generators do work a little bit differently, or they use a combination of different technologies. So at a really high level and generally speaking, Stable Diffusion is one of those deep learning text to image models that's made up of several components and models and steps and processes. So on the slide here, you can see this outline that kind of serves as a visual representation of those steps. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into these specifics because this is a lightning talk, but if you do want to know more, I can put a link to an informational blog that I found in the Slack channel where I got this information from. But instead, I'm going to focus on two main areas of concern and kind of talk through that a little bit just to set the stage. And to put those kind of in layman's terms, it's going to be the concepts of image understanding and image generation. So the first step and then the output. And that is to say, in order for Stable Diffusion to do what it's intended to do, it has to be able to decipher a prompt, understand what images within those data sets are categorically relevant to the prompt with a certain level of confidence. And then it has to predict a certain level of noise and what image generation it should derive as a result. But where do they get those images to start with? Well, let me step back and talk about something really quick before I get into web scraping. So it used to be that, this thought of creative work would be one of the last things that would be automated. Inspiration and creativity are truly organic experiences. Regardless of the type of creativity or inspiration that is being invoked, creativity does require the act of using your imagination and developing ideas to create something new. In theory, technology exists to make our lives easier so that we can pursue more fulfilling and more human activities. The sudden rapid progress behind AI art generators has caught the eye of many a startup and numerous corporations as a way to replace artists, illustrators, designers, models, and photographers to maximize profitability. And on top of that, the AI art generator you're using is probably built on heaps of stolen art, copyrighted material, and not to mention some worse things here that I'll name, like private health information, violent imagery, racist iconography, explicit sexism, and sometimes even revenge porn and child sexual abuse materials, very unfortunately. So many of these data sets have been, sorry, moving on to this, I forgot to switch over. Anywho, so many of these data sets have been indiscriminately collecting these images. And this is regardless of who owns it, or again, how offensive or just absolutely disgusting they might be. And this is why image generators like DALL-E originally launched with a disclaimer notating that the results might include discriminatory imagery, hate speech, and those other horrible aforementioned things. And so to answer like my previous question of, well, where do they come from? Well, a lot of the time, web scraping. So in order to collect millions upon millions of images needed to just empower these data sets, those scrapers are used. And I'm sure many of you do know, but a scraper in a nutshell is a type of script or software that's designed to extract data from a website or various websites across the internet, depending on the use case. These tools will index information they find and collect, unbeknownst to those who may have posted those images. And just know, scrapers are widely used. They're used for a lot of different purposes, and they're constantly everywhere. But this is one way they're being used that's arguably bad and can harm others. And for example, Lion, however you want to pronounce it, that Stable Diffusion's model data set did not have any opt-in or opt-out feature. They said, quote, Lion datasets are simply indexes of the internet, i.e. lists of URLs to the original images together with alt texts were used and found to link to those images. Lion explains that on their website that's still there. And ironically or not, various owners of image generators have yet to make their datasets public. So let's step into the gallery for a moment. Here are some examples of artists and individuals revealing the nature of these AI outputs, highlighting the similarities between the two. So in a lot of these cases, you will have an original work of art next to an AI generated version of that art, which is supposed to be quote unquote new, right? So in each case, it's very, very clear that in these circumstances, there is artwork that's being ripped off, and there's not really much inspiration happening here, right? In most circumstances like these, the AI generator simply adds kind of a smoothing or three-dimensional effect, but otherwise takes a rather cookie cutter approach to producing an image. And weirdly enough, in many of the circumstances, the person behind the prompt, as Chris had mentioned in his previous talk, they wanted credit for the image itself, saying that they were the original creator when they definitely were not. And then you might be thinking, well, what's the legality here? And some do make the argument that AI art creates a completely new image, and that person behind the prompt is the new creator of that image. And both of these statements are pretty untrue in some way. Obviously, we can see that here, but also, for starters, the US law does state that intellectual property can only be copyrighted if it was the product of human creativity. And the USCO only acknowledges artwork that is authored by humans in the present. Machines and generative AI algorithms, therefore, cannot be creators, and their outputs are not copyrightable, which means the generated image is incapable of having any definitive ownership based on the ruling of intellectual property. So in terms of whether or not a new image is generated is, highly debatable. Many prompts encourage the use of terms like in the style of, or have generated images that are only marginally different than the source materials. Again, we can see here. So regardless, whether or not someone's own artwork is utilized as a stepping stone for source material is really that larger issue at hand. So if you're boiling it down to brass tacks, someone else's art is still being taken and it's still being appropriated in a way that conflicts with existing licensing and copyright laws. And since that is something that's happening, I did mention that scrapers are one way that AI art image generators are collecting their data sets, but it's not the only way. Another example is that there are people who are specifically seeking out art that they like or that they want, or they just want to copy it, whether that's to imply ownership or to have something just because they want it. And despite all of those legal issues, there was a particular artist that I've been following a story, a Polish digital artist named Greg Rutkowski, that's hard to say that 5 times fast. Greg has been relentlessly targeted and harassed for trying to remove his own artwork from these data sets. And according to a website called Lexica, which tracks over 10 million images and prompts generated by Stable Diffusion, Rutkowski's name has been used as a prompt over 93,000 times. Now you might be thinking, across the world, that's not that much really. There's billions of people on this planet. But for reference, let's take a moment. For reference, some of the world's most famous artists, such as Michelangelo, Pablo Picasso, and Leonardo da Vinci have only been brought up about 2,000 prompts or less compared to Greg's, again, 93,000. And this has happened despite his protests and persistence of not wanting to be included in those data sets. So furthermore, some large art platforms such as ArtStation and DeviantArt willingly offer their users intellectual property to the data sets without their consent. And Rutkowski is one of many of those harmed by that particular method of data collection. And at first, the ability to opt in or out for those sites was really, really murky. Eventually, through user feedback and unrelenting protest and some legal ramifications, both art giants actually had to switch their approach from having the opt-out manually per picture to having to actually opt in and say, hey, yes, I want to be a part of that. And little did these companies know they might have been in a little bit of hot water for these incredible missteps. Which brings us to the topic of current lawsuits. Y'all remember Napster and how that revolutionized the music industry? While these circumstances aren't the same, they do have a similar precedence. Stability AI, DeviantArt, and Midjourney are all involved in class action lawsuits that have been brought upon by several different artists that allege that the company's use of AI does violate their rights and the rights of millions of artists. The lawsuit states these images were all taken without consent and without compensation. On top of that, Getty Images, yes, you know the one, is also suing Stable Diffusion for using up to 12 million Getty images to train its model, again, without consent or without compensation. And more lawsuits are continuing to pop up with similar claims as time marches on. And for artists, I'm going to say this. You do have a copyright in your artwork as soon as it is created and fixed into a tangible object. It does not need to be registered with the Copyright Office to have a copyright notice attached to your artwork. Now, what I will say is that inherent copyright, it does last for the life of the artist plus 70 years after the artist's death. You can register your artwork and get a copyright for it as an additional precaution. I've even done that. And there are benefits to doing so. You can think of registering a copyright as requesting, let's say an official birth certificate where you're the parent of your artwork. This registration can serve as a legal paper trail, and it kind of indicates your ownership and relation for you to your art. So in any case, the basis of these lawsuits, it's primarily centric to the issue of utilizing someone else's artwork, their intellectual property, their baby, to create something else without express permission, consent, or compensation, matched with their inability to have all of those things or even have a say in that process. Now, this argument of inspiration, it keeps cropping up, but a computer cannot be inspired in the ways that a human can. In place of creativity, a series of equations, algorithms, and processes are reconfiguring images, and sometimes not even that much deviation happens there. And let's take a second to step aside from the legal and look at more of the personal ramifications. So how is this affecting artists? There are so many different artists that are being affected by this in a lot of different ways. And this is whether that artist is working at a full-time job with a larger studio, if they're a contractor, or if they're an independent commissions-based artist, an online influencer, a hobbyist, you name it, whatever. It is, the sting is still there. At the very least, these people either have been affected by it or they know what's going on, myself included. And already there have been imposters, harassers, and circumstances where artists have been unable to protect their work. Like I'd mentioned Greg earlier. And a lot of them have been ripped off or cast aside by companies, clients, and these aggressors that are seeking out ways to replace them or commodify their work without using them in the process. And this doesn't only harm the artist financially, but there's also an effect to their creative process, how they navigate the industry and the world at large, as well as their mental health. So art is a form of expression, a way to explore oneself. And in a capitalistic world, it is one of many ways to make money. Art has a history of being simultaneously coveted and commodified while being vastly criticized and underappreciated. And this is no different. All in all, ethically, this is obviously a very, very moral gray area. If you were to ask me, I would say it's a lot worse than that and darker than the consensus, and it's revealed a lot of unsavory actions and results given these circumstances. I think that might come from the overreaching sentiment that most people have become used to. Bad is kind of normal and therefore it is what it is. But you know what? I disagree with that mentality. I'm of the opinion that ethical considerations, like those who have spoken before me, should be made at the planning and architectural design stages of developing tools such as AI art generators. Heck, these possible outcomes should be considered before anything like that gets into the hands of the population at large. This is going to be prior to release. We're talking about having policies, regulations, and governance around the system, and it should always be in place so we can mitigate or reduce or prevent any potential harm or problems as much as possible. And the unfortunate truth is many of these existing technologies and data privacy laws do thrive in that moral gray area. So for instance, this is kind of an aside, but I had read this recently. OpenAI, who does own DALL-E, who owns ChatGPT to that point, has recently been found that there's how should I put this? They went on a quest to make ChatGPT, quote unquote, less toxic. And in order to do that, they're using slave labor in Kenya. They're having engineers in Kenya that are being paid just pennies on the day to make these changes. So moving forward, we do need these types of regulations. We should push for them, and we should ensure that we create a legal precedent, shape the standards, and ensure that these new laws do happen. We're currently in the Wild West stages of these technologies, and they need guiding hands that value ethics, equity, and most importantly, human rights. So with that, I would also like to say that tech companies overall could use a complete ethics overhaul in a lot of these cases. This does bleed into areas of supply chain, intended purpose, impact, and standard data privacy. There's more to worry about than just TikTok when it comes to your own personal data and proprietary information. Just read any privacy policy attached to the most popular applications or research any breach from the past few years. Our data is always at risk. That's the sad part about it. But in the meantime, if you're an artist and you post images online, check out tools like Fox, that's FAWKES, that basically scrambles the images whenever it's being processed through image generators, so it messes with the results. That's one of many ways you can combat the recent influx of art theft. And then I will finally say, preserving creativity and encouraging artists to follow their passion is still a future I can envision. But it takes more than just myself to make that happen. AI art is in a current state that is not in a long-term creative motivator. It's an image copier, and it currently steals and reconfigures art so a small handful of organizations or people can make money off the back of other people's work. Despite all of this, I am hopeful for the future, and I trust that many others will support artists as these things continue to transpire.